All right, good morning, church. All right, today we are actually going to start a new 4-week series. So we got through our fall series. We just got another one leading up to Christmas here before we get into Christmas for a couple of weeks. But we're going to be doing a series called Staying on Target. And the reason we're doing this one is this world that we live in today, information can become very overloading to us and overwhelming to us, the amount of information we receive. But in life, some information is much more important to know and know how to act on and remember than other information. So it's very essential for us to kind of understand what is essential information, what is non-essential information, and make sure that the essential information is the stuff that we are practicing in our lives, that we are implementing into our lives, and we are acting on. For example, let me give you some examples of how some things are essential and some things are not. Knowing the number to 911 in an emergency, that's an essential, okay? Knowing the number to Papa John's, not an essential. So knowing which information, now some of you might be going, well, I don't know, but it's true, all right? Knowing your spouse's birthday is much more important than knowing your favorite sports hero's career stats. So knowing what day your wife was born on is a much more important thing than knowing your sports stats, just letting you know. Knowing what's going on in your kid's life is much more important than knowing what's happening in your favorite TV shows. Just so you're clear on that and you understand that. Knowing your address to your house that you live in is much more important than knowing what your favorite YouTuber is saying on YouTube today. Now, the reason I bring that one up real quick, I'm not talking to adults, so I'm going to talk to high schoolers and junior hires. So look at me for a second. Would you all stand up for a second, because I just need to see this. Junior and senior high, stand up for a second. Girls back there, yeah, come on. How many of you know your address to your house? Raise your hand. Okay, how many of you, put them down, how many of you do not? 3. Okay, sit back down. And Demarion does it. I was just wondering, because my son has no clue. Literally, if he loses his phone and he gets lost somewhere, he's dead and we're never going to see him again because he doesn't know phone numbers, he doesn't know his address, and people would be like, who are you? Gideon Zimmerman, where do you live? I don't know. Who's your parents? I don't know. What's your parents' phone numbers? I don't know. That's what it would be like. He knows Dylan's. He does say that. He knows one of his cousin's numbers. He's like, I called Dylan and tell Dylan to call you, and that's how we get hold of you. So I wanted to bring that one up. You kind of need to know what's essential information and what is not essential information. Knowing what bills need to be paid in your life is essential. It's important, and it's much more important than knowing what decorations you're going to put up for the holidays, all right? And knowing how to track your finances is much more important than knowing how to track a deer. Unless you don't pay your bills, then the only option you have to get meat is to track deer. So if you don't learn the other information, maybe tracking deer is the best option you have because you need to go hunt and kill your own food instead of going to the supermarket and just buying it like us normal city folk, all right? So just so you're aware of that, having the ability to identify and focus on what's important and relevant in our lives is critical. Otherwise, what we do is we just kind of get lost in our lives and it all gets cluttered up and we lose focus of what really matters. And if we're not careful, what we can do is we can end up wasting substantial amounts of time and effort in pursuits that literally have no lasting value to our lives. So, one of the ways that we avoid this trap is we take time to kind of just refocus ourselves in our lives to make sure that we are pursuing the things that actually are important and the things that are substantial and have meaning in our lives. So we have to make sure that we are staying on target and make sure that we hit the right mark that we are aiming for. This applies to our personal lives as well as our spiritual lives. Jesus warns us about this issue of kind of losing focus. If you go to Matthew chapter 7, there's a very unique passage in verses 21 through 23 at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus goes through all of his practical, it's kind of what they call his meat and potato sermon, which is wherever he went, he gave this sermon of the Sermon on the Mount. And towards the end of it, here's what he says. He says, not everyone who calls out to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. So what he's saying here is, not everyone who says to me, I'm a follower of yours and all that, is going to enter the kingdom of heaven. He says, only those who actually do the will of my Father in heaven will enter. It says, on judgment day, many will say, Lord, Lord, we prophesied in your name, and we cast out demons in your name, and we performed many miracles in your name. But I will reply, I never knew you. Get away from me, you who break God's laws. This is actually kind of a scary passage Because what it shows is this: someone that loses complete focus of what's really important in a relationship with Christ. And they have convinced themselves that they're actually doing what Christ would want them to do, but they've actually lost focus. They're focusing on the wrong information. It says here, these people are going, we did this in your name, we did miracles, we cast out demons, we did these things in your name, Lord. And he's going, I don't know who you are because you weren't doing the things I asked you to do, okay? You weren't doing the will of the Father. You were just doing what you wanted to do. You were doing the routines you wanted to do, but you weren't doing what I asked you to do. So it's kind of a scary passage, but it's a passage that warns us you need to make sure you stay on target. You need to make sure you are focused on the important things, the very meaningful things, the things that God wants you to do in your life, not just what you think you should do, and kind of get set in a routine where you lose focus and kind of things get cluttered in life. So over the next few weeks, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about 3 areas of our spiritual lives that we must be targeting to be faithful to and living out above all else. Everything else in your spiritual life is secondary unless you get these 3 things right. Now, if you attend here regularly, these are going to be familiar to you because about every 18 months, 12 to 18 months, I make sure I hit these 3 things and we talk about them so that we're always staying focused, we're always on target. But they are simply this: representing Jesus to the world around us, honoring God with our lives, and following the Spirit's lead wherever he moves. If we target these 3 areas of our lives, I guarantee you that God will be pleased with us as his church and as individuals because we will be honoring him and doing the things that he calls us to do and be the people he calls us to be. So, today we're going to begin by looking at the first area of our spiritual lives that we need to make sure that we are targeting, and that is this. It's representing Jesus to the world around us. 2 Corinthians 5, it says this: so we are Christ's ambassadors. God is making his appeal through us. We speak for Christ when we plead, come back to God. Now here's what I want you to understand. God has no plan B, okay? This is plan A, and this is the only plan. We are it. We are his plan. So every day you wake up with breath in your lungs, your focus should be in understanding that we represent Jesus to the world that we live in on a daily basis. I am always amazed when I talk to people, and I had a conversation this week again with a guy about how people who have rejected the church, rejected their faith, one of the main things they'll spend their time telling you about why they're not a follower of Christ and why they don't go to church anymore is they tell you all these stories about people and how people failed them. And they just kind of tell you this instance happened, this happened in church, and it's always people focused. And after I listen to them, I always try to make it very clear to them that it's not the church or God that actually failed you, it's people. Okay? It wasn't church, it wasn't God. God is always faithful. God is always truth. God is never changing. He is not the one that failed you. But I want us to understand this, that the majority of the world is going to evaluate the credibility of Jesus' claims by looking at you and looking at me and looking at us as his followers. Very few people's first interaction with Jesus Christ is through reading the Bible. It actually is through interacting with us, the people who claim to be his followers. So because of that, we must focus daily on doing a good job of honestly representing Jesus to this world and to the people we interact with on a daily basis. Now, in order to clearly represent him well, we have to kind of understand who he was and what the world saw with Jesus when he was actually living here. We get a good glimpse of this stuff by the scriptures because you get Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that do a pretty good job detailing his ministry years, this 3-year window he does ministry. And you actually get from the other authors of the New Testament with Paul and some of those guys as well, some other topics about who he was, how he lived his life, what people learned from him and recognized about him. And so what I want to do is take the 3 that I would say are the most obvious and talk about them today so we understand what it takes to actually represent Jesus well. So here is the first most obvious quality I would say that is connected to Jesus Christ and who he was, and it's this: unconditional love. So number 1 is unconditional love. Jesus was unconditionally loving to everyone he ran into. Now, to understand that, again, we have to understand the definition of love, which I talk about all the time, because in our culture today, it has been horribly skewed, and people do not know what genuine love actually is. Most people think love is sexual, okay? That's what they think. Or most people think love is this, I agree with you on everything, and I tell you what you want to hear. That is not what love is. True love is this. It's a commitment to benefit another person's life. That's what love is. Love is as I say, a commitment to benefit another person's life. So if I love my mother who's sitting up here, that means I'm going to do what I can to try to benefit her life. So if I have opportunities to try to help her, to benefit her life, I'm going to do that. I love my children. So therefore, since I love my children, I look for opportunities to benefit their lives. And that's many different ways I try to do that. That's how I do that. If I love Richard, then I'm going to look for opportunities in my relationship with Richard to benefit his life, to make his life better in the ways that I can. If I love like TT, who's not paying attention right now, but if I love like TT, what I'll do with TT is I will try to benefit her in her life in different ways. And TT knows this because I have conversations with you all the time on the bus and stuff and tell you how to do different things and stop being an idiot and things like that and how to do things differently to be successful in life. Right, TT? Okay, the reason I do that is because I love her. But it's not the love of the world. It's not the love that the world shows all the time. It's because I love people. And so if you love people, you try to benefit them, try to better their life in the ways that you can with the influence you have in their life. And you see that with Jesus time and time again, is this guy loved everybody. I mean, he tried to benefit everyone, and I'm going to show you here in the scriptures, obviously, the number one way he did it. But I don't want us to just focus on the love part. There's a second part to this, which is this, unconditional. Okay? Unconditional love. Unconditional means it has nothing to do with the other person's worthiness or unworthiness. You just choose to give it. You just choose to love them. Here's where we struggle most as humans. It's easy to love my mother. It's easy to love my kids. It's easy to love my wife. It's easy to love people I'm close to and I share life with. It's not as easy to love people who are my enemies, to love people that I don't know real well, to love people who annoy me. It is very hard to love those people. But with Jesus, he showed us unconditional love, which is it's not about the other person. It's about your commitment to God. And therefore, since God tells me to love others, I'm going to love everyone the best that I can and the roles that I have with them. And it doesn't matter if they treat me well. It doesn't matter if they treat me bad. Either way, I'm going to love them. And I, on my end, am going to try to better them. Does that make sense? So we have to love like Christ did. In 1 John 4, 9 through 10, it talks about Jesus' love for us. It says, God showed us how much he loved us by sending his one and only Son into the world so that we might have eternal life through him. This is real love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as a sacrifice to take away our sins. Here's what's interesting. This passage here tells you this is real love. So he's going, I'm defining for you humans what real love is. And what he says is real love is this. When you hated him, when you didn't care for him, when you didn't do things that pleased him, when you rejected him, when you lived your life the way you wanted to live your life, and you could have been just obliterated by God, and he could have just went, I have no use for you. He went, I choose to love you. And in spite of all of your garbage, in spite of all of your issues, you know what? I love you, and I love you to the extent of this. I want to better your life so much that I know you can't get rid of this thing called sin, and it's going to separate us for eternity. So guess what I'm going to do? I will go die for you. I will die for you. Okay? I will take away your sins and I will solve your number one issue in life. I will die for you and remove your sins so you can spend an eternity with me in my paradise in heaven for eternity. Okay? And what he says is this is real love. It's unconditional. It had nothing to do with you. It was his choice to go, I'm going to better your situation. And the way I will do it is I'll give my life for you. And so Jesus leads by example in unconditional love. And we see it throughout his life, and we see it with the ultimate sacrifice of him giving his life. Let me move on to the second quality. The second quality I would say stands out above all the other things about Jesus. The second one that I go, this is a big one, is the guy had unconditional compassion. Okay? Now let me define compassion for you. This is how I define compassion. Taking the time to notice other people's hurt and being driven to alleviate it. Okay? Compassion is not just noticing people hurt and feeling empathy for them. That's empathy. You just feel bad for them. That's not compassion. Compassion is an action. Compassion is I have empathy for them. I can feel their hurt. I can feel their pain. And I'm going to do what I can do to alleviate that to whatever degree I can. Okay, that is compassion. Now, here's the thing that's different between us and Jesus. Jesus could show compassion to everybody, and Jesus did everything he could to try to alleviate that. We can't. We cannot show compassion to everyone, just physically, emotionally, financially. we aren't real capable of doing that with everybody. And so what we have to learn to do is how do we show compassion to those that we can, even when we can't to everybody. And so that's always a question I get asked from people. Scott, get this one probably more than, I'd say this is one of the top questions I get from, how do you determine who you show compassion to and who you help and who you don't? Okay, because living in the city here, because we're city creatures, how many of us on at least a weekly basis see someone begging for money on a corner? Raise your hand if you at least on a weekly basis. Okay, so just about everybody in here. You see people begging at the corner. How many of you have ever been approached in a parking lot, someone asking you for money in a parking lot where they come up? Okay, that's the same amount of people. You get that one. We get this all the time being city people. People will always come into our life that have a need or at least said need, and we have to determine, can I show compassion to them or not? And not just empathy, but compassion, which is I'm going to try to alleviate their issue to whatever role I can do in that. Let me tell you what I answer people with that is. I don't have a set rule. I don't have a way of figuring it out. Other than this, I know I can pray about it. I know that I can trust the Spirit's lead, which we'll talk about in a couple weeks. But I can trust God's interaction to tell me that's one to handle and this is one not for me to handle. And let me tell you why it's very important to do this through the filter of Jesus and through your relationship with Christ. What it allows you to do, it allows you to feel okay not having compassion with some people and showing compassion where you can. Again, not empathy. You can have empathy for everybody and feel bad for a situation. You can only show compassion for so many. You can only try to alleviate for so many. Some of us have the means to do it for more, some of us less. But what it allows me to do is this. Look at this person, feel bad for them, but go, I'm not helping them today. And walk away and feel okay and be at peace with it. And looking at this situation over here and go, exact same situation, but this one I'm helping on today because I feel like God's calling me to help that one today. So for example, over the last 2 weeks, there's that car parked out by the dumpster. Did everyone kind of see that one over the last couple weeks? A couple of kids, they were 20 and I think 21. Is that right, Stephen? They're somewhere in there. A couple of guys from a small town in North Dakota. They thought the way you just kind of move on with your life is you just get in a car with $80 in your pocket and you can just drive to a new city and everything works out for you. And it would just be all fine. Okay, so they learned a lesson and they happened to be driving through Tulsa and their starter went out and their car died by our dumpster and that's where they got it. And they had no starter, they had no money, they have no family, they have no friends, they've got nothing. And so they're there. Me and Stephen helped them out a lot over the last 2 weeks. And the reason I did, and I told them this, is because I felt like God was telling me, you're people I'm supposed to help right now. And it happens at other times, and I don't put much effort into it. I put a lot of effort into these guys, trying to help them out, make sure they're taken care of, and stuff like that over the last 2 weeks so they didn't die out there in their car, and we find their skeletons out there this Sunday when we walk up, because they had nothing. So trying to help them out and had practice compassion with them, and what happened was, did they leave Wednesday or Thursday, Stephen, do you know? Wednesday? So Wednesday, they're finally able to leave, and I convinced them to kind of go back up to North Dakota, fix some things with their family and all, be a little smarter next time before they leave, and, actually save some money up beforehand, try to get some jobs before they actually leave North Dakota and come down to Tulsa and stuff like that, because you can do there's this thing called the internet, guys. Go on there and use it. So did some things like that all week, talking with them, and the cool thing was on Wednesday, before we left for vacation, me and Autumn take off to California for the day, I got to share my faith with one of them, and just had him down in my office. I said, hey, would you mind if I just share why I'm a Christian? And he's like, no, I'd like to hear that or whatever. I was like, hey, come on down. So I got to sit there, and Stephen interrupted me a few times, probably made it all not work, because Stephen just didn't care, but I did, okay? But anyways, through that whole process, got to share my faith with them, why I'm a follower of Christ, and I look at that and go, that was a confirmation that God was calling me to show compassion to those guys, because it gave me an opportunity to share my faith with them. And it was, for the one guy, something he'd never heard before. So it was interesting having that conversation. But doing it through prayer allows you, again, to walk away from some situations at peace and engage in other ones and know, even if it costs me a ton, this is what I'm called to do, and I'm at peace with that as well if I have to sacrifice greatly, because I feel like God's calling me to do that, all right? So here's what it says in Matthew chapter 9, verses 36 through 38. It says, when he saw the crowds, and this is referencing Jesus, when Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were confused and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. He said to his disciples, the harvest is great, but the workers are few. So pray to the Lord who's in charge of the harvest. Ask him to send more workers into his field. So what you have is Jesus kind of going, When he showed up to situations, Jesus instantly could feel people's hurt, their pain, where they were lacking better than we can. But he could feel it, he understood it the minute he connected with people. And he knew how to have compassion on them, to serve them, and to meet the needs that they needed met at that time. He was incredible at it. Obviously, he's Jesus Christ. But he says here, guess what? You need to pray for other workers to find the same thing, to be able to do the same stuff, because the fields are ripe. I just need workers to go into the fields. Who are the workers then? Us, the church, okay? Jesus was praying for us to be people that had the same compassion that he had, so we would represent him to this world when he left it. So we need to make sure we are people that have unconditional compassion. Again, let me hit on what unconditional is. Unconditional is this, simply, that it does not matter what other people's worthiness or unworthiness is. We just choose to act and show them compassion. Whether they treat you well or don't treat you well, it does not matter. You show them compassion because you're called by Christ to implement that in your life. That brings me to the third quality of Jesus Christ that I would say is undeniable. That was one of the huge things. When you saw Jesus, you saw this, and it's this: unconditional service. He was a guy that served relentlessly. He gave his life day in, day out to working himself to exhaustion, trying to serve humanity. Service, I define this way. It's seeing a task that needs to be done and personally taking care of it yourself. Okay, that's what service is. You see something that needs to be done, you go and you take care of it. I say this: you have to be a good listener and observer in order to serve effectively. You have to be someone that listens to people. You have to be someone that's aware of things going around so you can figure out how you can help and how you can jump in and serve. A couple examples of that: you have Mark Bussey, who's not in here right now. Mark, this guy, you guys don't know this because you're not around the church building except for when we have programming and stuff a whole lot. Mark Bussey's at this building probably, Teresa, 15 hours a week outside of church stuff? And doing stuff at the church because he knows it needs to get done. So like all the lights in the old part of the building have now been switched over to LED. We did that envelope thing that provided the funds for it. We've bought the lights. He's been slowly taking each one of those, and there's like 68 of them or something in the old part of the building, taking them down, taking out all the wiring. He does it all the wiring out of them, rewiring them, putting in the LED lights. And he's done that whole part of the building. He's done the fellowship hall. He's now upstairs in the upper part where the teen ministries are, doing those, and then he'll move into this section in a little while. But the guy's up here relentlessly serving in the dark behind the door, or behind the doors where no one sees it, doing that work. Another instance we had of these things where you just have to be aware. As I heard, is Becky in here? I want to pick Becky out because I don't think she did it for that reason. But Becky Gardner, there's a few weeks ago on a Wednesday night, some of the girls were in the bathroom and they made a mess in the bathroom and like got water on the floor and took a bunch of the paper towel out, which then we found out who a couple of them were and laid the hammer down on them. But besides that point, they made a mess in the bathroom, and it was Becky who went in and just cleaned the whole thing up. And she just cleaned it all up. And when I got to it after all of our programming was over, I went to it in the bathroom, looked normal. And I found out it was Becky who just kind of went and she just cleaned it all up because she saw the need. She saw the girls kick them out or whatever and was like, I'll clean it up. Okay, that is servanthood. Now, the other side of the servanthood on this one, again, unconditional. Let me tell you what unconditional is. It has nothing to do with the circumstances of that service. Some people would go, you're asking me to clean toilets? Yeah, it's clean toilets. Okay, it's just what you do. As a minister, I can't tell you how many toilets I've cleaned in my years. I clean them all the time. In fact, I've had staff a lot of times come get me and be like, that toilet's bad, you need to go clean it. Okay, I'll go clean the toilet. Okay, it doesn't matter what the circumstances are. You just do it without question, without complaint, and without looking for reward or recognition. And this is the hardest part of this one. Serving without wanting reward or recognition. Because most of us, when we serve, we want someone to tell us thank you, right? It's nice. When someone tells us thank you for doing something, they recognize we did something, it's nice to have someone tell you thank you. But would you still do it if no one ever does? Jesus did. And that's what we're called to, is unconditional service. Let me just read you a couple of passages. Matthew 20, 26 or 28. Jesus, this is after he washes the feet of the disciples. So this is the last time he's meeting with them before his arrest. They come in for the last dinner. He takes time and he washes their feet, which was the lowliest servanthood you could have in a house staff. Of the people who were considered slaves back then, and it was different slavery than we know in America, but they were indentured servants or whatever. The lowest dude on the totem pole washed your feet when you came indoors because they walked back then with sandals and all that stuff. And if you're like me, the feet are like the sickest part of the body. Like, I've never seen good-looking feet. Like, I don't care who you are in here, your feet are ugly. I'm just letting you know. So, yeah, reality check. I'm sorry if that wakes you up, but feet are ugly. Doesn't matter whose you are. Now, mine are pretty good, but in general, feet are ugly. But with that said, Jesus comes in, and he come walking into this room, and he starts washing her feet. And I think it's Peter who basically says, there's no way you, my Lord, are washing my feet. And Jesus goes, if I can't wash your feet, dude, you can't have anything to do with me. And Peter's like, therefore, man, just wash my whole body then, whatever you need to do. I'm sorry, I didn't want to disconnect from you that way. So Jesus washes her feet, and after he's done, he says this, whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must become your slave. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So Jesus, by example as well, was a servant. That just you want to be a leader in my kingdom, you serve. That's what you do. You go out and you serve, because that's what I do, and you follow my example. You represent me to this world. In Matthew 6, 3 and 4, this is talking about giving money, but it can be translated over to your serving as well. It just says this, but when you give to someone in need, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Give your gifts in private, and your Father who sees everything will reward you. And I would say this, be okay doing your service in private without worrying about people praising you and thanking you and giving you credit. Just do it. If you hear it, if you see a need, and you have the ability to meet that need, go take care of it, whether it's here at the church or out in life. Look for ways to serve other people when you are aware that there's an issue there that you can meet. Serve them. Okay, use your skills, use your life to serve them, because by doing that, you represent Jesus and you show them the life that Jesus showed us. So to close today, I just want you to understand this. If you consider yourself a Christian, a follower of Jesus Christ this morning, you represent Jesus to this world. You are actually him to the world. So love people, have compassion for people, serve people, not because they always deserve it, but because of what Jesus has done for you. You now represent him to this world the same way he represented himself to us. Make sure you are staying on target in this area of your life, because if you don't get these three things down, the rest of your faith, the rest of your spiritual stuff doesn't mean a whole lot if you can't put these things in practice. You represent Jesus to a world who doesn't know him. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father,